Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Planning for Nonprofit Leaders. This program today is brought to you by the Education and Research Foundation of the BBB of Metro New York, and is also brought to you thanks to our sponsor, American Express, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes. I also want to thank our collaborators for this event, the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, the Better Business Bureau system, regional BBBs all over North America, including Canada and now Mexico, and the Council of Better Business Bureaus. We have a lot of people we like to thank when we put these programs on, and event supporters are among them. Baruch College School of Public Affairs, Human Services Council, the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee of New York, nycharities.org, New York City Department of Youth and Community Development, and United Way of New York City. I also want to thank our staff, Luana Lewis, who is SVP of Programs, Walter Brewster, SVP of Operations, who helped to put this entire program together, and of course you, all of you in the room, and all of those who are joining us via live stream all over North America and Canada. So thank you so much for being here. You know, the Better Business Bureau is a federated system. There are 113 Better Business Bureaus all over North America, including Canada and Mexico, and about 57 BBB foundations. And among all of that, we have charity review programs done by about 57 BBBs that report on charities, totaling about 11,000 charity reports. That includes all the BBBs and the Wise Giving Alliance. So a lot of reports on charities, a lot of nonprofits, and a lot of need for this type of information. What I will ask all of you to do today is, after our program, if you wouldn't mind filling out the evaluation forms. And for those of you joining us via live stream, you will get instructions on how to do that as well. We have a Twitter hashtag, #BBB Charity, and please, we invite you all to tweet to your heart's content about the program. I also would ask you to save the date for our next program, which takes place on November 12th, Strategic Planning for Mission Impact. We will do it here again. And now I would like to introduce Richard Brown, Vice President of Philanthropy for American Express, who will introduce the rest of the program. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Claire. Good morning. I first want to welcome the folks who are viewing us virtually via the live stream, wherever you might be, and also the folks here at the Scandinavia House who have joined us in person. American Express is glad to be able to partner with Claire and the BBB to sponsor the Cybersecurity Workshop. As a company that handles a great deal of personal information, we are quite sensitive to the importance of cybersecurity and keen on ensuring that the nonprofit sector is provided with the most up-to-date information on how to secure its data. This morning, we have a distinguished panel of representatives to discuss the issue, and it's an honor for me to introduce them to you. I'll first introduce our panel moderator, Bill Fanelli, who is the Chief Security Officer at the Council of Better Business Bureaus. Thank you, Bill, for agreeing to moderate the panel this morning. Next, we have Andrew Bromis, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer, Goodwill Industries of Greater New York and Northern New Jersey. Thank you for joining us, Andre. Next, we have Elena Brotman, a shareholder of Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Welcome. Our next panelist is Wesley P. McDuffie, who is Security Evangelist at IBM. Interesting title, Wesley. That's, I'm sure our folks are going to want to know much more about. And our last panelist is Andrew C. Toner, Partner, Financial Services, Cybersecurity, and Privacy at PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP. Appreciate your participation as well. I will now hand the mic over to Bill, who will guide us this morning. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. So let me give the audience just a quick sense of how we plan to proceed today. We're going to start with what everybody probably came here for in the first place, and everybody in their offices tuned into just run down through this panel of people who've got a lot of experience and ask them for their top recommendations for a nonprofit of how to improve your security posture. And then we're going to dive deeper into really how to think about your security posture. This is National Cybersecurity Month, which has been really focused on awareness, trying to get people to understand that that cybersecurity is something you really need to take a real hard look at and pay attention to in your business. And this is evidence that we've been successful on the awareness part of that. And we've been pounding, I was just telling Andre, we've been pounding on this door for years and years to get people to pay attention. And now the door's flung open and we're in the room, and we've been trying to say, listen, and now we have a chance to say something, and we're trying to figure out now what to say. And so the focus is going to be on trying to give you a framework of how to think about your security so it isn't just plain overwhelming. The Cybersecurity Awareness Month is sponsored by Homeland Security. Homeland Security is pushing the NIST cybersecurity framework. National Institute of Standard Technology had a collaborative effort with industry and government to put together a framework. And the easiest way to describe it is by its top 5 functional areas of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. So identify what's in your environment, what touches your network. And we're going to focus on cyber here. I mean, if you run an ice cream stand, if your freezer breaks down, that's clearly a huge impact to your business. But we're going to talk about the cyber side. So really the focus is what's on your network, then what data is in your network, and that helps you prioritize what protections you need to have in place. And you can't protect it if you don't know it's there. Then protect, so identify, protect. Protect is put protections in place proportionate to the value of the data that's out there on your network. And it's what needs to be in place before a bad thing happens in your environment. Identify, detect, protect, I'm sorry, I've got to get it right. Identify, protect, detect. Detect is for small organizations absolutely one of the most difficult things to do. It's watching and knowing that something is happening in your environment. What are you going to do about it? So how do you know that it's time to do something? The next is respond. Once you've detected something, what are you going to do right now? And there's 2 goals. One is keep the business running, and the other is to contain whatever loss might be occurring. And then finally, the last step is recover, which is getting back to normal operations. So that's kind of going to be the organizational principle later on in our conversation of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And really make that an earworm. It's an easy thing to do. Get that mantra. That's something, it's a nice way to think about security. So let's get started. I'm going to ask each panelist to tell our audience kind of what would you, and this in security, this comes up all the time. I'm at a party, I just talking to somebody I haven't seen in a long time, and I find out that they've taken over some security group and a nonprofit, and so they want to know, what do I recommend? What should they be doing? And that's what we're going to do here, and then include a little bit about what's your background that makes this piece of information kind of compelling. And so I'll start. I've been doing cybersecurity for 10 years, but in a previous life, I was much more oriented toward physical security and worked with UPS systems, uninterruptible power supplies. And I had the opportunity to work with those rarest of people and a really honest salesperson. Stan would come in and on his first meeting with a customer say that an uninterruptible power supply is really a misnomer. There's no way to guarantee the power to your data center is never going to stop. What I offer you is, yeah, you're nodding your head. You have to run data centers. You know this. I'm offering you a product that will dramatically, and this is really what cybersecurity is about, is risk management. I will dramatically reduce the probability that you will have a power outage, and that if it does happen, that the impact will be much less. And so I come from a background of thinking that our job is to prevent bad things from happening, but I acknowledge bad things will happen. And so in addition to trying to stop them, you also have to be prepared for that it's going to happen. And so my recommendations are take backups. Back up everything. And if you don't know the difference between a full backup and a differential backup and an incremental backup, go find somebody who does. And make sure that they've done something in your organization that applies those things so that you know how to back everything up and recover from it. The next piece is about backups. You need that backup to be off-site. If you have a server meltdown and you have a backup right next to it, you can recover. If you have a fire, you're going to lose the server and the backup, and you've got nothing. And the last thing about backups is everybody has heard about, I hope by now, ransomware, where bad guys get in, they install some software on your machine, and they encrypt all your files. And now they want $300, maybe $500 worth of Bitcoins, another place you don't want to go, to get the keys back, to get your access back to your files. Though the newer versions of those tools will also encrypt any files that it can get even remotely. So your backup has to be offline. If your backup is just connected to your system, if you get hit with ransomware, that backup is going to be just part of what you now no longer have access to, and you'll have no way to recover. So I've probably taken too long to give an example, but let's go down. Andre, what would you recommend?
Sure. I mean, you touched on some really important points. My recommendation would be to engage your senior leadership in the organization, make sure they have an understanding of cybersecurity, the importance of cybersecurity. Education is key, so you have to educate the folks that are decision-making individuals in your organization. Part of that means that you also have to have an understanding of what the organization is about. What is the organization's strategy? You know, what are the risks to that strategy? At the end of the day, what you really want to have is some business continuity. And that's where cybersecurity comes in. How do you continue the business after an attack? Because the reality of it is, it's not if you will be attacked, it's a matter of when. There's a joke in security, that there are two types of companies in the cybersecurity world. Those that have been attacked and those that don't know they've been attacked. And that's the sad reality that we're in. You know, Bill touched on the part about ransomware. And these attackers, these threat actors, are getting very, very smart. They've been getting smart. And we've really been chasing the tail in the cybersecurity world with a lot of these actors. The ransomware, years ago, the first version of that ransomware software that would encrypt your files, there are ways that security professionals can go in and unencrypt it, right? There are ways to do that. The new version of that ransomware that was released earlier this year, well, let me back up. If you had a solution in place, the ransomware, what it does, it downloads to your computer, and then it goes out and connects to what's called a command and control center for further instruction. Once it gets that instruction, then it encrypts your files. The new version, and so if you had security in place, you could stop that communication out to the command and control center, so therefore your files wouldn't get encrypted, so you're reducing your risk and exposure. The new version of that ransomware that was released earlier this year doesn't need to communicate to a command and control center. So your users, through your firewall, can hit a website, get some bad content, get an infected email, get hit with that same ransomware, and your files are encrypted, and there's no way that you can get those files back. So to your point, you have to go to backup. So I think the key takeaway that I would say here is you have to educate, not scare, educate senior leadership so that they're empowered to make the right decisions to promote the cybersecurity policy that you're going to have in your organization, as well as educate your users, because the users continue to be the most vulnerable, right? A lot of times you don't find people that are going to do something out of malicious intent, although those people do exist in our organizations. We don't want to think that they're there, but they're a small population, they're there. But a lot of times you have people just want to do their jobs, and they're going to find a way to do their jobs, and sometimes it's not the best way, and it introduces risk to the organization. So if you educate the individuals, they'll actually help you keep some of those risks lower.
Wow.
So first of all, Andre stole the only joke I have. So I've got nothing for you, other than maybe some advice. So to just, as Bill had asked, let me just give a little bit of my background and maybe why I was asked to participate here. I've done both the nonprofit world and the cyber world. I had worked in a tech company doing their policy issues and as well as running a part of a business, and then went to the Senate where I helped craft a couple of bipartisan cybersecurity bills, among other things. And a lot of that had to do with international cybersecurity protocols, as well as some things that we could do maybe more effectively and cost efficiently with respect to cybersecurity in the military. And then I went over to DoD, where part of my role was to help shape cybersecurity procurement rules, because I would negotiate with the technology folks, the CTO folks in DoD, who were looking at it from the security angle, and my responsibility was also to take a look at what does this actually mean for businesses? Is this implementable, especially when you look at smaller and smaller businesses? And we also invested in technology that we wanted to make sure remained onshore, for domestic production, so that DoD would be able to continue to purchase some very sensitive technologies. And I also worked at the tagline is the largest local nonprofit in the US, which is in the metro New York area and supports 97 different nonprofits, from very, very small one-man shops to the largest behavioral health nonprofit in the state, and dealing with all sorts of different issues, from cultural issues to health and human service kind of issues that are covered by HIPAA. So bringing those two things together, I'm thinking about what is a very practical thing that I would say, and I would definitely start with what NIST names and what Andre alluded to, which is focus on your crown jewels. I think one mistake nonprofits might make is to say, well, we're not a big bank, what might you want from us? But each nonprofit is likely to have something that's of interest to somebody. So it could be your donors, with all the personal information that you might have for the donors. If you are a health and human service nonprofit, you might be HIPAA regulated and have all kinds of privacy restrictions that way. You might be worried about maintaining your good standing with the standard bodies that look at using credit cards, right? So you don't want to be in bad standing and not be able to accept credit cards from donors. You could be a cultural nonprofit with all kinds of strata of society coming in, and that could be interesting to somebody. So first, figure out your crown jewels. And then also determine if you're under certain specific regulations that actually make you, require you to report a breach, for example, under specific regulations. Again, I said, HIPAA is one of them. Obviously, the financial industry has others if somebody is specifically in the financial industry. And really try to minimize the amount of sensitive data that you maintain. And then that way you can focus what you encrypt on the sensitive data that you really must have. Like, do you really need to collect those social security numbers? Do you really need to keep all the data on your donors that you might keep? Do you keep people's credit card information after they've donated or after they've used your services? Think about whether you have a particular population that's vulnerable. So I was giving an example to someone that at the philanthropy, we had supported a large agency that provides senior services, and they did something really innovative. They installed interactive TVs in homebound seniors' homes so that these people could continue to get monitored. They can continue to get all kinds of social services. It's just wonderful. It completely changed these elderly people's lives. It also means these people these clients who are now very connected, were one of the least likely populations to actually know what to do with computers and computer security, and got a regular social security check, right? Not rich people, but certainly have a regular stream of income. Those are now people who might be vulnerable. And so thinking through that. And the one thing, it's, nonprofits are like any other business, but likely to have a lower budget. So what do you do when you can't afford big, fancy technology, outside consultants, and you can't afford a CTO, a CISO, a good sysadmin, et cetera? One of the first things that you need to do is really have good personnel policies, whether that's for your internal people, not just high management, I would say everybody, especially when you have younger people working for you who may be on a lot of social media, that tends to provide a huge vulnerability. As well as your customers, as Andre had noted, customers, clients, et cetera. And really enforce it. Act like you really mean it and not just put something out that maybe an update once a year through some kind of a click-through, PowerPoint on their screens. And then one last piece I'll add, and then I'll turn it over, is, so what's a little different for a nonprofit maybe than for a for-profit? I'd say one thing is the reputational risk is particularly acute for a nonprofit, as it is for certain types of businesses, let's say retail. But I'd say in nonprofits, how do you really convince your donors, whether it's government or philanthropy, that you really could provide the service? It's all about reputation. So that reputational risk has to be preserved through a breach, which means you've got to have plans in place for how are you going to deal with notifications of customers, notifications or clients, notifications and donors, notification of government. How do you react quickly enough? How do you ensure that people will have confidence tomorrow? Because everybody will get breached. So how do you maintain that confidence and maintain your ability to provide those services? And then the positive for a nonprofit is you do have these donors, and you can federate in some ways with other like-minded nonprofits. There are all kinds of associations, and find ways to get these security measures funded without having them be borne only by your budget. So government in certain localities may have a great interest in doing this. I really think that the New York City government would have such an interest, and I'm happy to talk to folks who are particularly interested in New York after this. And I think that this could be an interesting idea to talk to some foundations about, because this makes sense to do in an amalgamated way so that the security helps a bunch of little organizations, because that cost is not affordable for any one organization. That's it.
So in the beginning, it was stated that I'm a security evangelist. We'll go ahead and kill this 600-pound bear now. I preach the gospel of security from the Church of the Painful Truth. I do not lie about it. I do not sugarcoat it. If you're sitting out here, you're listening, and you hear, and you're getting a little fidgety because of what I'm saying, take heed. This is what IBM pays me to do. It's a very large company if you've never heard of us. We do $1 billion a year in research, just in cybersecurity. We have thousands of patents. We have one of the largest outreaching arms in the security world. If I was to give advice to a CISO picking up or somebody taking over a nonprofit for security, it'd be the same advice I give everybody else. Far too long in this industry, we've been concerned, and we've labeled ourselves as the power of no, as in N-O. No, you can't do this. No, you can't have that. No, we're not going to do this. And the reason being is because, A, we don't understand. We have to become the power of no, K-N-O-W. You must know yourself, know your craft, know your network, know your limitations. You have to know the limitations of what you can and cannot do by law, by policy, by what your staff can do and cannot do. We have to know those things. We have to know exactly what is on our network so we know exactly what is not supposed to be on our network. There's a reason we have these protocols and these policies. And I will leave you with this. Dance like everybody's watching. Or excuse me, dance like nobody is watching and encrypt like everyone is.
So good morning, everyone. Andy Toner. It's tough to follow an evangelist, but if I were to be asked that same question, I've been with PricewaterhouseCoopers, by the way, for about 30 years, and been in the security business as long as PricewaterhouseCoopers has been in the security business, which is not 30 years, because when I started, security was really not a big deal. We were working on mainframes and that kind of stuff. So I've seen a lot of evolution in this space, and we've helped a lot of clients secure their environments. And everybody has said a lot of good things here already, so I don't want to repeat. I want to just emphasize one of the things Alana talked about, which is the crown jewels. We've kind of evolved to a point where it's become very clear that the bad guys are very good, and they have lots of resources. You can't protect everything in your environment. So if you try to, and a lot of companies have been trying to protect their environment as a whole, you really have to understand what's important to you, to your customers, to your donors, to whoever are the important people in your environment. And just to put an emphasis on that, I was with and it's going to sound ridiculous, but I'm just trying to make a point. I was with a hedge fund CEO about a month ago, and we were talking to him about what does he think his crown jewels are. And this is a hedge fund that has well over $200 billion under management. And he said, look, if I lost $100 million, he said, it sounds stupid, but it wouldn't really mean that much to me. It's less than 1% of my portfolio. He said, but if I had to disclose that something bad happened in my environment, every one of my investors would be concerned. And so it was really all about the reputational risk. And that was the most important thing. So when we talk about the crown jewels, I just encourage you to kind of maybe even talk to a lot of people in your own environments and really make sure you understand. I would have never guessed he would say that until we had that discussion. So I encourage you to really kind of dig deep in your environments and really understand what is important. The only other thing I'll leave you with, because I don't want to repeat what others have said, is one of the hardest things in security is getting good information and getting it in a timely manner. There's lots of sharing organizations out there for banks and the big businesses, right? I would encourage you guys, even if it's just small groups, you kind of find your own groups, figure out a way to share information that's happening. So if somebody gets attacked, is there a way you can kind of share that with the other organizations fairly quickly so that you can take advantage? Because lots of times when these things start happening, they snowball. And if you can stop it quickly, it would be a big help. And so I don't know the right exact answer on how you do that, but I think there's enough of you and enough of your organizations that there's a real opportunity to kind of share and get benefit out of that.
Thanks, Andrew. So hopefully we've kind of touched on an overview of what it is you need to be thinking about. The goal is to not send you home disheartened or terrified. The goal is to send you home empowered and having a way to think about this. We've talked here about problems and what to do about them. I think one overriding message here is you have to be ready for a bad thing happening in your organization, because we're past the days where we can put up a high enough fence to prevent a bad thing from happening. We have to be prepared for that. In the idea of Halloween is coming. This is the zombie apocalypse. There are lots of not very smart, but lots of things out there that are trying to get into our environment, and they're just relentlessly pounding on the doors. And when they get in, you got to figure out that they're there, and you got to get them out. But that's our job, is to keep an eye out what's happening. So to move down through this more proactive approach of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, I'm gonna put some questions to our panelists to really look at that of how do we think about this and move forward and give you guys a framework to think about security. So I'd ask the question, so one of the first things we have to do is identify what's on the network. We'll get to the crown jewels in a moment, but there's a piece of just knowing what's on your network. A lot of the work that I've done is you do vulnerability scanning and the first thing you do is go scan the network and find out what's there. What is it? What's its address? What machine is it? Is it, are you still running Windows 95 or, XP? And those are terrifying things to security people. But what's out there? What have any of you seen? I'm sure, Andre, you've got a big operational environment. When you go do this, what have any of you seen that when you went out and did a list of just identifying what's on my network, were you, this is never a pleasant surprise. What sort of surprises have you seen, and what did you wind up having to do about it?
Well, the scary thing is sometimes, like you said, it's a surprise. So sometimes you think you've done, a full scan and you have all your information, you have all your documentation. And it goes, again, to making sure that your users across the organization are aware. There's a term that I like to use, I can't own it, but it's out there. It's due diligence and due care. So cybersecurity folks, IT professionals, we really know about due diligence, right? We're sticklers for it. We'll make sure that we have everything covered. We'll dot our I's and cross our T's and have everything set as much as possible. Sometimes what's lacking is the due care. And that's the portion where you get the support from, I think Elena was the first to mention it, the entire remnant of your company, your organization. Everyone's aware, everyone understands, and they're exercising due care, making sure that things are protected. So when we go out there and do these scans, someone actually plugged in, and again, staff will do things because they want to get their work done, right? And we have limited budgets, so I understand it. I'm not happy about it, but I understand it when I see it. Staff at one point plugged in a wireless router. Now, depending on what type of switching technology you have in your network, how hardened it is, a wireless router could be devastating. Why? Because the default configuration for a wireless router is to give out its own addresses. So now it's going to conflict with your own system of giving out addresses. So now you have users that can't connect. The network is going up and down, and it introduces a vulnerability because anyone can sit in the middle that gets that address and pretend to be an actual computer and try to get the transmission between where it's intended, the intended target, and try to figure out what's going on. So they can actually use it to sniff your network. So we see this and we think that we're getting attacked and something's going on. Staff are now scrambling, trying to figure out what's going, where this is coming from, what's happening. And it turned out that this individual, they plugged in a wireless router because they had a report due. And they needed 4 laptops to connect, but they only had 1 network port available. And they couldn't get IT, to respond in time to set this up. So they took it upon themselves to plug this thing in. They said, okay, it's just like I do at home. I'll plug it in, I'll connect these 4 laptops, and I'm rocking and rolling. Problem is that because they did that, they introduced a vulnerability to the network and a network outage on that segment. So those are some of the things that, when we do those, well, I didn't really do a scan, I kind of found that out on incident, but those are things that happen that, we have to be painfully aware of, and it has to do with also making folks aware.
And so one of the things I've been asked to do is help translate some of this to an audience here we don't expect all of you to be cyber geeks. So one of the things that we talk about is this is a wireless router. If this is a wireless access point, if you've got that feature on it, this is a wireless router. And if you plug this thing in and attach it to your laptop or your computer at work to charge it, you've now attached a wireless router to your network. In addition to it having all kinds of storage and things on it and applications that could get onto your laptop and then into your network, you have to be very careful about what's attached to your network and things that you thought, it's a policy in our shop that if you want to charge your phone, you have a charger you plug into the wall and you plug that into your phone. You do not plug it into a computer because that's a connection into the network. And there's bad things that can happen. There was a situation, I think it came out under Snowden. I mean, you have to even be careful with chargers that it was at some international government conference and all the attendees got a little bag of goodies, and one of the things was a charger. Well, that charger had malware in it. Now, we'd call it malware. It was developed by a government, ours, and it infected their phones, and it was spyware. I mean, it was government spying on a bunch of attendees at an international conference. So you even have to, I mean, generally, we're not concerned at that level, but you have to know that those kinds of things are out there. What else? I mean, more customers, I guess.
Yeah, I could add just a sort of a story. I mean, one of the things we do a fair bit of as a firm is help clients after they've been breached. And what you find, and because of notification laws and things like that, if you have personal information in your environment and that gets breached, you need to do notifications by law. So we need to go out and really understand, what did the bad guy actually touch or potentially touch? And in doing that, we almost always find devices that are out there that no one knew existed anymore, but they're still on the network. Test devices that, but they still have production data on them. So you find a lot of, maybe it's sort of back to the due care, right? But you need to make sure that your environment is clean, especially when you're talking about personal information, things like that, because we always find more information than anyone knew existed on their environment.
If you don't mind,
Please.
what is scarier? 4,000 missing laptops in an organization, or one server you can't find that's heart beating around your network? Think about it for a second. What is scarier? Because both examples are exactly true. A two-letter agency has lost 6,000 laptops with personal identifiable information on it, and I've got a three-letter agency that I'm working with that can't find a server to update it. So not only when we talk about identifying, do we identify the hardware, you identify the software, you identify the communication paths. If you can't see the communication paths between all of your computers and all of your servers on the network, you've only done half of your identification. You have to know.
Maybe just a couple. This goes back to, well, 2 points. One is on the personnel point. Teach your people to recognize communications, emails that are just a little bit off, because people are getting so much better at drafting something that seems like it could probably come. And teach them what to do when they see it. You don't open, you don't click on links, as you all know. But and it's not that this has not been around, this information's been around, people have read about it in stories, but it's a constant reminder, because, as Andre said, people are just trying to get their job done quickly with very few resources. Teach people about not transferring documents easily from home to work, especially, and including on their work computers. So they got stuff done with collaborators on a Google document, and then transferring that into your system creates all kinds of vulnerabilities. This is all about consistent education, but then ramifications if it does happen. I'm not saying people should get fired necessarily, but people need to know this is serious. And for those nonprofits that do a lot of work abroad, human rights and refugee organizations, for example, when you bring your equipment to a number of different countries, but particularly a small number, you want to have it reviewed and cleaned after you bring it back, because it's going to be infected. So, especially if you're, for example, a human rights NGO, I don't know if there are any here, you are of particular interest to the very countries where that sort of thing happens very expertly.
That's a very dicey environment. We just in our organization had somebody who was going to, in this case, Saudi, and we were configuring their system for secure communications. And in looking into it, one of the things we found out that it's illegal to use encryption in Saudi Arabia. And so, how do you protect the data, but at the same time protect your personnel? Because if they get caught using this stuff, you've got a completely different problem. And in this case, our employee had diplomatic immunity, so there were some protections there.
I mean, just a quick tidbit, and I know this is probably just a small number of organizations, you might just buy them something they throw away after the trip.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to deal with there. I'd ask you to speak a little bit to the something that you brought up, Alana, and it started with you, Andre, the do care. Some of the things that I've had to deal with customers I've dealt with over the years is there's really two separate issues. One of the things you have to understand is there's two very different things you have to deal with in security, and one is it's keeping the bad guys out. And the other is more just it's unfortunate to say it, but it's a very legalistic side of it, which is having a decent defense when they get in. And that is what due care speaks to. One of the partners that we deal with in the DC area is the Federal Trade Commission, and they go after people who have been flagrantly negligent in their protections of their data. And so you can get sued over it, and if you have a breach. And so to speak to that due care of what's the distinction between just making honest efforts to keep the guys out, where my focus is just to prevent a breach, but also being able to demonstrate that I made those efforts if I wind up ultimately in a court of law and have to prove to somebody that I actually was doing a reasonable job. Do you guys come across that?
By law, yes, you have to. That's, if you can't, it goes back to no. If you can't prove what you're doing, you can't prove what didn't happen. You can't prove what didn't happen, you can't prove what did happen. Something as simple as not having the time set right on all your servers can be thrown out. A welcome banner can have it. So when you take your due diligence and your due care, all you're doing is prolonging and trying to outrun your adversaries in the long term. We know it's not going to happen. You ain't got to be perfect. If you have your home Wi-Fi router set up with a password, and I run by and I hack your password, you've taken the due diligence to secure that, and I've broken the law. If you leave it wide open, I can hop on it anytime I want to, as long as I'm not on your property. It's the open door theory. If your door's open, as long as I'm in the street, I can look at anything you own. But the minute you close the door, I can't go open your door again. So it's that simple when it comes down to your networks as well.
Yeah, let me dovetail on that. And the diligence and care actually work hand in hand. They're a strong partner. And a lot of times we've been comfortable or more aware of the diligence part, all right? That's just what professionals do. We make sure, again, like we dot our I's and cross our T's. The reason why care comes into play is because, for example, not scare tactics, but just reality. You have certain ISPs, right, internet service providers, that will say, well, you can get internet by these hotspots throughout the neighborhoods when you go out there. Now, for not-for-profits, we'll have cable modems installed in our locations, and we'll have those set up. But those ISPs, the reason why some of them can offer those hotspots is because they're actually piggybacking off that signal to offer to the community. So you have a cable modem sitting in your facility that's also allowing other people to use it as a hotspot. So is that an introduction to a risk? Yeah. Because at some point, if a vulnerability is there and it's exploited, you now have the potential to having something there that you don't need to be there. So you'll be diligent enough to say, okay, well, we'll do the exercise and try to figure out what service is available for this particular location. We'll get the service installed. But if you're not exercising the care and going that extra step and saying, okay, well, you know what? How do we, look at all the risks with putting this system in place? Do we need a firewall here? Do we want to keep this piece of equipment or change it out? You always exercise, where available, the extra added protection, because the safety measures need to be in place. Otherwise, we're just gambling. And with the employee risk, you mentioned security. You keep the bad guys out. You keep the bad guys out. That everyone understands. But people don't really, I guess, exercise enough effort in protecting your employees. Bill, you mentioned about the phone being a threat, potential threat. And some years ago, folks, I was on a panel, they're talking about mobile security. And one of the panelists exercised an effort to explain mobile security. And one of the things they start with is that they said they don't call it mobile security, it's just security. Right? And what we find is that unless you understand the full gamut of security, it's not mobile security, it's security. It's not just cybersecurity, it's looking and assessing risk in your organization. You understand that the security guard is at the front door, he's stopping people from coming in through that door. You have locks at that front door. There should be locks to your data. Where does your data reside? Is it a missing server somewhere? Is it on 6,000 laptops floating around somewhere? If you exercise the care and the diligence, those 6,000 laptops that are floating around somewhere, you'd make sure that they have the right things in place to protect them.
I can't overemphasize the importance of having rules and procedures in place to protect yourself if there is a breach as a practical matter and against lawsuits, because you really need to show that you have not been negligent. I can't overemphasize having a plan of action once you've discovered a breach. Who do you need to notify? You don't want to break the law. For what you should be doing as a practical matter, legal matter, and for your reputational risk, you don't want to be turned into the bad guy when you've been hacked because you didn't do right by all your stakeholders. You want to be seen as somebody who was on top of it, did as much as he or she could, and then reacted appropriately, and is therefore one of the victims, and not one of, turned into sort of a bad guy who didn't react appropriately. I'm also thinking in terms of vulnerabilities. I've seen some interesting things. The use by nonprofits, I'm thinking of museum, I'm thinking about that senior service organization that I mentioned, of social media and new technologies to actually deliver services and to capture more eyes. There's a wonderful, wonderful museum in New York where they give you a digital pen, and kids love this, right? You go through and you do all kinds of things in the museum, and then you get a little address to where all your stuff is uploaded, and then you as a kid are toying with it back at home. You can't control any of that, nor can you control you now are actually interacting with minors. You better make sure that all of that is not directly an open door to the rest of your system, because you've now created all kinds of other vulnerabilities. I'm not saying not to do these wonderful new things that you could do with social media, but just think about segregating it from your crown jewels.
I'd like to ask one question about under identify. We tend to think about, hard things that we can see. Where are my servers? Where are my routers? Do I have passwords on them? But really, what prioritizes all of that is the data that's on them. As you were saying, particularly when you get into minors, there's a whole new set of rules that you have to deal with there that are just mind-boggling. And one place that I'm sure everybody in the room and who's listening has to deal with a very unstructured data stream is your email. And you've got very little control over that. It's got tremendous flexibility, but there are huge problems with it. I had a customer that they handled credit cards all the time, and they had a remote location, and they knew that, in this particular case, they couldn't put the customer's credit card in the system because the rules said they couldn't do it. They were trained, and they knew, and they listened. And so they scanned the customer's credit card and attached that to an email and sent that in to corporate, and thought they were doing something better, and instead had created this huge, huge problem that violated all kinds of things. You've now taken not just personally identifiable information, but you've taken credit card information, which has a whole different set of rules that go with it, and you've put it in an email which is unencrypted and accessible to everybody in between you and where it gets received. I'd like the panel, just because this is probably an area that, how do I deal with email when I start talking about the data as my crown jewels? How do I keep what data has to be kept out of an email, And Andre, to your point, and this is what you were saying before, so often what we find happens is somebody's just trying to do their job. And there's nothing intentionally malicious about it. They're just trying to do their job. How do you help them do their job, but make it clear what they can't do as part of doing their job, and particularly around email, because that's I'm sure everybody here has to deal with that.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I did in my organization is I put in place a data loss prevention strategy. And data loss prevention is just simply a tool that will look for communication within your email. And if the email is unprotected, unencrypted, and it finds social security numbers, personal identifiable information, Medicaid numbers, it all depends on what your regulations cover your organization. But based on those regulations, you put those rules into your data loss prevention system. It looks for that content in the email, and it will automatically encrypt the email for the user so it secures it and then continues the transmission onto the intended recipient. To me, that's the best method to make sure that the work continues, but you still have that level of protection in place. That's what we've done.
Okay.
And you can take those capabilities even further, right? You could stop that email altogether and not let it go, right? So if it's that important to you, and it helps with the education, right? If a user's sending something and it comes back to them because it's violating a policy, they probably will stop doing it. So, and even in the case where you may not stop it, you could still send them an email back saying, you know, your email's been encrypted because you violated a policy. And so a lot of it's just behavioral and ongoing education as well.
Actually, to dovetail on that, and you made an important point that I neglected to mention. The other benefit of the data loss prevention policy is that a good system will allow you to actually look for sensitive information. One of the things that we also look for is information that's important to the organization, right? IP, intellectual property, and the system can scan. Right, a well-set system can scan for IP and actually block that transmission. So if you have financial data that you know shouldn't leave the organization at all, it's something that maybe is exchanged with auditors at a specific point in time, and there's no other reason that information should be sent out of the organization. You can actually set the system to block it and then notify the appropriate individuals that, hey, this information was going out of the organization. That's also very important. And it just occurred to me that one of the low-hanging fruit of the organization is actually your fax machines, right? You have these multifunction printers that sometimes when they're not properly set up, people can email directly from those printers. It's not going through your email system at all, so you can't really see it if you don't have your system set properly, but people can actually go put information on that bed, scan it, and then send it out to their personal email or wherever. So again, with the identify, that's something that you also have to identify are those areas where you say, okay, you know what, there's a potential risk in this area that I need to cover. And that would come up in that identification process.
Yeah, and that speaks to the understanding your due care and due diligence. If you go to that fax machine and you faxed it, that's considered secure. If you go and scan it and email it, the email is not secure. And so you've got to understand what your transmission processes are. Let's move on to identify, protect, right? So protect is, what are those, and we've started to touch on them, DLP, data loss prevention is a very useful tool. Some of that is even starting to get built into commercially or consumer tools like Gmail is starting to support it. What sort of protections should a nonprofit have in place beyond, a firewall? Well, we'll start with keeping the bad guys out. What is it that, what protections are most important to have in place to prevent an intrusion?
I could start with some of the simpler things, which everybody should be changing their passwords on a regular basis. We've just seen a major cyber breach recently, and that will lead hackers to understand what kinds of passwords people use, and people tend to use the same password over and over again. So something that may not even happen to you may lead somebody to an open door to you. Two-factor authentication is a good idea. It's just, another simple way to put a second lock on your door. Limit who gets access to what data. The fewer people who have keys to your crown jewels, the fewer access points you've got for theft. This one is a little kind of off cybersecurity maybe, but let me just mention, you might think about purchasing domain names, so what you look like on the web, your addresses, that are similar to yours, that are in other domains. So you're a .com or a .org, you might purchase some other, a .net or .ny or what have you, because you don't want to be the apparent sender of a spoof email. You don't want to, even though nonprofits are exempt from the Canned Spam Act, you don't want to. There are limitations. You don't want to start to seem like the actual bad guy and actually have liability based on that.
Let me get a consensus of just who's in the room, since I can't see everybody's hands out in the internet world. In here, how many of you have networks of 100 people or less? Let me address you for a moment, because anything that we talk about up here is going to be way outside your scope. Passwords, yeah, keep them changed, make them long. Patch management is going to be your biggest ally in this. Removal of administrator rights on all your machines. Users don't need that. Get rid of it. You ready? 92% of all critical vulnerabilities found in all Microsoft operating systems are removed when you remove administrator access. I've just reduced your threat portfolio now down to 8%, and it was free. Take that as advice. That was free. IBM doesn't give a lot of things out for free. That's one of them. You've got to stay within your scope. And we start talking about adding firewalls, we're adding this, adding whatever. For you small areas, you're not going to be able to get a good, decent firewall. Let me tell you, there are free ones out there you can download and install on a piece of old hardware. It will give you something. It will come with intrusion detection built into it. You won't get any protection, but you can see. Then it goes back to you won't know how to use it. You won't know the education, so you'll have to take time to figure it out. Because something you get that is technology-based and you try to use it and you have no idea is worse than not having anything at all, because you can make it a lot worse on yourself.
Yeah, one thing I would add that we see a lot of companies get themselves in trouble on is the use of sort of third-party vendors. So if you're taking donations and you're using some credit card processor to take those donations for you, those types of things, though you're responsible for that data, even though it's a third party doing it on your behalf. So I would encourage you to at least reach out to your third-party providers, ask them what they're doing from a security perspective. They'll be very used to answering those questions, but it's important, that, again, back to your sort of legal stance, if you haven't asked those questions, somebody's going to say, you didn't do your due diligence. So that's an area that a lot of people miss, even in the large corporate world. So I'd encourage you to look at that as well.
I worked with a government agency, and for a lot of reasons, their firewall policy was, I'll just call it lax. And I argued with them long and hard about you need to lock this down a lot more. It was very easy for anybody on the outside to come in. Now that said, 90% of their problems came in through email, and that's really the vector. I mean, even if at the network side your door is wide open, its email is the vector. And to amplify what Wesley was saying, particularly in a small outfit, this is a free way of really increasing your security posture is to, on Patch Tuesday, when that window comes up and says, do you want me to install updates? The answer is always yes. It has to always be yes, because the way most of the stuff gets in is an email, and the email is trying to open up something in Adobe Reader or in your browser, and it's found a weakness in one of those products. Now, Adobe knows about that weakness. Firefox knows about that weakness, and they've done something to fix it. If they haven't, they will by tomorrow. And so if you've patched that, if you've installed the update, then even if somebody clicks on that link, you've dramatically reduced the possibility that it's going to turn into an infection in your system. So having your people trained to know not to click on a link, but then to have the systems updated so that when you do click on a link, it doesn't turn into an infection is probably the easiest, simplest way to keep the vast majority of what's trying to get in the door out.
I don't want to say as a part-time bad guy, but as somebody who works on the dark side of the internet a lot, I don't have to worry about your networks as far as trying to use my resources to break into them. You're going to do it for me. I know your patch management cycle takes on an average about 2 weeks. I'm going to wait for another vendor to tell me where their weaknesses are when they apply the patch. You're not going to patch it that quick. I have about what we call a patient zero. I have about 2 weeks to attack you if I want you. Your patch management cycle has to get down and it has to be automated. You have to get it done within hours. But you're not going to do that because you're going to test it on a couple of machines, make sure it doesn't break anything. You're going to have to go through a board, talk to some other people before you can have your changes made. And ma'am, so you're not left out. Macs get viruses too. Just not only the Mac people out. And they also carry Windows viruses. So if you have a mixed environment, you have to be even more cognizant of that. But you have it automated. You get the human out of the mix because it's the human that messes it up.
To touch on Wesley, since he targeted the Mac, and I like Macs, the scary thing as this world changes and gets scarier is that, you mentioned about taking the administrative rights out of the machine. Users don't need that. The scary thing about Mac viruses is that they don't care about the administrative rights on the Windows machine. You get a Mac, you have a mixed environment, you get a virus on a Mac, and you have Windows machines, all those Windows machines are instantly compromised. And the bad guys know this, they know this, they know this. And that's why we have to be diligent and make sure that we have the right system in place. For years, not-for-profits thrived on security by obscurity, right? They don't know about us, they're not gonna, attack us because we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're not, big name organizations, or corporations that are gonna be a target. That's not the case anymore. You could actually be pulled into an attack by collateral damage, right? I could be sitting on the network looking for whomever. Your organization's internet profile comes up. I don't know who you are. But as soon as I jump in there and I start to profile you, I say, oh, wow, you have some information. That's interesting. And you don't have the right security controls in place. Let me try to traverse your network once I get on. Oh, wow, look at this. I found some credit card information. Oh, I found some personal identifiable information. And the black market, and it is a black market, pays dollars for this. Hefty sums of money. And that's their motivation. Now, I like to say like the car alarm, right? So if I have a Honda Accord and I park on the street, I have wheel locks, I have an alarm, I have a club. There are 3 other Honda Accords parked on the street. Someone's gonna steal my car. I can't stop them from stealing my car with the wheel locks, the club, and the alarm if they really wanted it. My goal is to make sure that they don't take my car, they go take yours. Because you don't have a wheel locks, an alarm, or a club, right? So the idea here isn't necessarily to scare you about you're going to get attacked and this is what's happening. We need to have the right measures in place so that when the attacker comes, they say, okay, you know what, it's going to cost me more to try to get this information. It's not worth it. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Andrew, you touched on if you go to a third party and they're doing work for you, that you as the organization that contracted with them, you're still responsible for that data. And I'd like to draw that circle a little wider and put a little finer point on it. Ultimately, the executive management and the board is responsible for that data. And a lot of what we're talking about here requires that you go out and ask your employees and perhaps volunteers. It can be particularly in a nonprofit community, it can be a very amorphous sort of organization, and we're going to ask them to start doing things differently than they're doing them now. Wesley, to your point, I found over the years the security tends to draw a certain personality type, and that's the power of no. It's like they're control freaks, and they like to say no. And as the security person, often that's the only authority you have. I can't tell you what you have to do. I can just tell you you can't do that. What's been your experience about trying to capture the mindset of the organization to be able to both reach down to, the people who have to do these things, the working groups of the organization, to try and bring them along in a way that they are willing to participate, but also to reach up to the board and senior management and get their attention and say, more and more and more the laws are changing so that if there is a breach, if there is an impact, if you're under SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley rules, the CEO can go to jail if you did not have, due care and due diligence. How do we get the board's attention to let them understand that they can be held personally responsible for this stuff?
Could I just speak to that in a broad context, and then maybe folks can take it more narrow? I worked through a huge nonprofit bankruptcy where things fell apart and the Attorney General is still looking at whether or not there's malfeasance. That was an enormous wake-up call for the board of directors, because so many nonprofit boards, as you know, are comprised of people who are well-meaning, but are there for altruistic but social purposes and have not taken it as seriously as the actual responsibility they have under the law. And I think that there's starting to be a growth of understanding among at least large nonprofit boards that they need to be much more cognizant, for example, of financial audits and governance in that respect. Well, I'd say that we need to start bringing in the information about cybersecurity in the very same way. It should be part of the governance and audit structure, just the way that financial and other legal responsibilities are. That's not going to be possible, I realize, for a lot of very small nonprofits. But once you're even $1 million plus in revenue, in terms of donations, et cetera, you should really be thinking about doing that as a regular briefing for your board. You should be thinking about adding cyber insurance to your board insurance, because companies offering cyber insurance provide all sorts of support, like what we've been talking about prior to anything, but also post the breach.
I would like to schedule a field trip with all CISO members to Sing Sing and Alcatraz, depending on what side of the country you're on, and wake them up real quick. Because a day seeing what it's like on the other side will actually wake these folks up, because everything else we've tried to date doesn't work. We've tried to make it part of our conversation piece. We say put security on the inside first, worry about this later, try to make your controls established from the onset, do secure configuration, and they look at it for the first week and then they set it aside and they worry about other things. But I honestly think I'm out of options. Scare tactics right now is where I'm headed.
Yeah, if I had, and I don't do a lot of work in nonprofits, but I can tell you that for the companies where I do work, I'd say almost all of the boards today are very aware of the issue. They're very aware of their responsibility. And to the point where I would say when they read something in the paper, almost every time the person in charge of security is asked, can that impact us? So I agree with Alana that if that's not happening, and it may not be happening in a lot of your worlds, but I think you should start the discussion and start to educate them. And a lot of the folks on your boards may be sitting on other boards, corporate boards. They're having these discussions. They're going on. And so I tend to have a little different view that I do think, unfortunately, the bad guys are probably helping us with this issue as well, right? Because there's something in the paper every day. But the boards are getting it, and I think if you don't feel that, I think you need to press it a little bit, because I think they're hearing it all over the place.
You know, in my experience, I know they hear it, but they don't move. They move strategically, and in the field, we have to move tactically. The bad guys are outrunning us. That is absolutely true. They're smarter than we are. Smartest bad guys, smarter than the smartest good guy. They're not getting caught, and when they are, it's very rare they're punished. If I have a moment, and I won't talk about the company by name, but I'll give you a pseudonym, and we'll call them Bullseye. And Bullseye was breached through an air conditioning system that was attached to their network. Here's the problem. The board was told. The executive board inside Bullseye was told. And they said, that's a business risk and we'll accept it. Therein lies the problem. They hear it, they know it, but getting people to execute on it. One of the things we have failed to do is when we work with security is work with our data owners. We worry about our risk and our threat. One of my largest customers does not use Java because of the risk. I still can't get them to show me the threat. Can't do it. So there is still a major disconnect from what executives say from the levels upon high. And forgive me, I don't get to a lot of those executive meetings. I usually get ushered out because I'm stirring the pot. Because there is a disconnect from what executives are telling us in the field and what we are actually able to do.
I'd like to turn our attention to the next step down, right? So we've looked at identify what's on your network, protect, what can we do to keep the bad guys out. Detection is, I worked with an organization, ran the Security Operations Center in a very large organization. We had 1 billion events, security events coming into that Security Operations Center every day. And we had that staffed with 30 people around the clock to look for security events and intrusions in that and then react to them. 30 people was probably more people than a lot of the organizations we have here in the room and online with us. That's not a practical approach to detection for most organizations. In a small organization, what is practical? How do I watch what's happening under the covers on my network and know when it's time for me to react to something?
Actually, it's not any different than we do it for a large company. I'm not going to push a tool. I'm not going to push a product or a process. If you want to talk about this afterwards, that you're more than welcome to. But there are tools out there that's going to allow you to do this. You set your controls in place to allow your business units to conduct their business. Outside of those business hours and those business units, you turn it off. Not the controls. You turn off the user's access. You turn off everything to the outside world that you don't need. You control your blacklists, things you do not allow under no circumstance. You control your whitelists. Those are also free. That's 2 things I've given you from IBM that is free. They're probably going to fire me after this. You have to have absolute control of what you put on and what you take off. Anything outside that norm, and you have to monitor it. You have to watch it no matter the size. Even if you have freeware tools, which I am abhorrently against inside any organization, but you may have to have something that will allow you to watch every single login, every single log out, every packet that moves, and you have to understand it. That means you will have to have somebody that does understand it, even if it's somebody in-house that is trained to understand it. Even in its smallest form, if it's nothing more than simple log management, to understand why did these 10 boxes log in at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why did somebody called admin log in at 3 o'clock in the morning on these boxes? And you have to investigate it.
But I would echo that. I mean, I think there are some tools that, and they're becoming more and more prevalent, that allow you to kind of monitor behaviors, right? So, you know, if Bill works 9 to 5 most days, and then all of a sudden, after a year of working for me, he shows up on Saturday and files start going out the door, he's probably doing something I don't want him to be doing. Or
It's somebody else doing something.
Or it could be somebody else.
To be
Right.
doing.
Right. And they'll do different things. They'll look at teams of people. So if you're working in a particular part of the organization and all of a sudden someone in that group is starting to do something that's a little different than their typical behavior. So there are tools that are starting to develop that are pretty good, that help with just the mass quantities of data that are hard to look through.
You know, this is really basic, but I'm just thinking of taking it down to a 3-4 person organization. Turn off your computer when you're not at your desk, especially if you're in shared space environments, right? Lots of people are officing. Just do some of those very basic things. Load clients that don't allow you to easily cut and paste from personal to computer emails, work emails. Those are just some very, very basic things in addition to this that you know, as Andre was saying, you don't have to be the fastest guy, you just have to be faster than the slowest guy who's going to get caught by the bear.
Taking it from, I guess, the more cautionary approach, threats today move at machine speed. And one of the issues with, can I borrow your term, bullseye?
Go for it.
One of the issues with bullseye is that they were overwhelmed with logs of all types of information happening. And one of the things that a bad guy will do is try to hide or mask their efforts. So they'll create all erroneous logs that, you know, is overwhelming. So Bullseye had millions of dollars invested in their IT strategy and had top-notch equipment that was saying, hey, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. But they were overwhelmed with the information. So my recommendation is that if you're going to make an investment in your cybersecurity process, and again, it is an investment, you can't get away from that. It has to be an investment, and you have to say, well, how important is the business, your organization, to the folks that you serve? Because it does become that issue of, you know, investing in the technology. So if you're going to make an investment, I would say that the investment has to look at the ability to detect and defend, because you can get hit with something and it'll overrun your security team where they cannot mitigate that attack. And you need someone that's there watching it to say, okay, you know, this is what's going on, let's try to shut it down by making sure that these things that you have in place are active. So whether it's a little bit of outsourcing to some resource that can actually look at that for you or not, I say that's something that you have to look into, that investment.
I'd make a suggestion of that's really very low tech. I came home, I had my son out, we were going shopping, my wife was out, and my son was in high school. We get out of the car, and in the garage is my NID, the network interface device, right? So we have FiOS, and the light on there blinks whenever something goes through on the network. And the light is blinking away like crazy. And I said, so Patrick, what's going on? What's that? And he's like, it's a box. And I said, well, look at that flashing light. What does that mean? He said, oh, there's traffic going on there. I was like, well, okay, what's that traffic? And he's like, what do you mean, what's that traffic? I was like, well, who's home? Well, the only two people who were home were Patrick and I, and we were standing in the garage. And I said, who's generating that traffic? Where is it coming from? And this light bulb started to go on in his head. And I said, well, let's go find where this traffic is coming from. And we went around, my laptop was turned off, and my wife's laptop was turned off, and the only machine that was running was his. And so we started to go in, and I'm not gonna try and explain to you all the commands we ran to figure out what processes were running and what connections they had, and then how to follow that IP address to some Eastern European country. But it was a very simple process to go through and find out where was this computer talking, and then just ask the question, why are you talking to North Korea? Why are you talking to Estonia? And then find the applications we're running those things and shut them off. So a very simple thing to do in your organization is to kind of go to the end of that and look on machines and open up and say, what's the installed application, and justify every single one of them. Because your users install an awful lot of junk if they've got the access, and those things connect to places that you don't want them to go. Just to speak, to ask the question to the panel, the internal threat versus external threat. We've been speaking a lot to the mostly external, but Andrew, you started talking about, if you see something where suddenly Bill's in there on a Saturday and he's never been in on a Saturday before, one of two things is happening. Somebody's taken over Bill's machine and is behaving like Bill, or Bill's gonna quit on Monday, and he's gotten on come in on Saturday, and he's copying all his files someplace. What's the insider threat look like, and how do we detect that, and how do we need to manage that?
It's a great question. I mean, in all of the surveys that I've seen done, the insider threat is still probably at the top of the list in terms of, one of the biggest threats out there, right? And it's very hard too at times to distinguish between the inside and the outsider threat, because the outsider typically, if they're good at what they're doing, they're going to look like an insider, right? So it's very hard to kind of distinguish, because they get themselves credentials, they look like a perfectly valid employee, and that's when they start doing things that you don't want them doing. It's really hard, right? You have to kind of, I think Wesley was saying it, right? Make sure that you're giving people only access to what they need access to, nothing more. In small organizations that can be very difficult because everybody needs access to everything. You need to even be aware of things, if you do know somebody is disgruntled, and maybe in smaller environments that's a little easier even at times, or if you're going to be letting someone go. There's procedures you really should go through to make sure that those people are off the system before you actually let them go. So there's things like that, very basic. They're going to have access to things that they can probably do damage if they choose to, or they're at least going to be able to steal things if they choose to, and it's very hard to detect it. But you just have to, try to keep them away from anything that you don't want them touching, really.
Years ago, I worked for the state of Georgia, and our computer system at the time was punch cards. I don't know if anybody in this room remembers how a punch card system worked, but there was trays of thousands of these index cards you slid in. If somebody was let go from the state, they would always walk by and slap 10 or 15 trays of punch cards off the top of one of our systems, and you'd have to go and pick them up. So we always knew if somebody was being let go because they'd call somebody else in early who wasn't being fired to go hide all the punch cards. So if you ever came in one day and the punch cards were gone and you didn't move them, chances are it was you. But that was our very first security mechanism when I worked in the state of Georgia, was hide punch cards from people getting fired.
I'd like to move on to respond. Generally, this focuses around having good plans in place. What are the critical pieces to a response plan. I now know there's been some sort of security event in my environment. What do I need to have in my plan to know what to do?
I guess I'll speak to the legal pieces since I spoke about that earlier. And it's not just legal, it's reputational risk. You want to know where you need to notify, whom you need to notify, and what you need to provide. And if there are exceptions pursuant to which you might want to do some other things before you notify. You need to know whether you need to contact law enforcement right away. And you need to think about all your different stakeholders, from donors to government stakeholders to clients, et cetera, that you need to notify whether or not you're required to, in order to make sure that they know so you're doing the right thing, so that you can maintain all those relationships afterwards. And of course, you need to right away start, I'll just touch on the technical for a bit, to know what happened, where it happened, and to seal off your system so it doesn't continue to just bleed while you're doing all these other things.
Make sure you only have one spokesperson for your organization, because I assure you, you do not want me in your network going and telling the media that something just happened when you have a spokesperson or someone like me that tells the truth about what just happened. You want your PAO, you want that person who's responsible for it. Not only do you have to have that, you must make sure that everybody in that organization is aware and follows that policy.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that, and these are all very good comments. I think what we do a lot these days with clients is to help them actually write a playbook, right? The actual steps that you're going to go through when something bad happens. Because if you don't have that playbook, you almost always do it wrong. So it's defining who needs to be involved, defining the actual steps and kind of the order that you think they're going to go in. I mean, things may change, but you need to put that in place, and most importantly, you actually need to practice it like a fire drill, and you need to do it pretty frequently with the actual people. So if it's the public relationships person, they need to be in the room. If it's the CEO, they need to be in the room. You can't do it with surrogates, and you need to have the actual people practicing, because if they're not there practicing at the time, they're going to do it wrong when the event happens. So that's a very important step to take. And it's not really that difficult. You just need to do it.
How about the trigger on that? I mean, you said who needs to be involved. What's the trigger mechanism? How does there need to be an executive identified that says, yes, we are now in response mode?
I think, as to Wesley's point, you definitely want to have that POC, who's your central POC, and you want it at that appropriate management level, because otherwise, as we know, nothing gets done.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Bill, that somebody needs to have the authority to say this is now an event that needs to be escalated, right? Or
It usually falls to more than one person, so one person can't just go, I'm in a bad mood today. Oh, we're in crisis mode, hit the button and run. You have a series of steps that you follow. You have a protocol. If we notice the breach and it's getting larger than what your SOC manager can handle, he escalates it up. Everybody's aware of it. Then that goes to the network operations manager. They both go to the CISO. The CISO then goes to the CEO and says, this is what we're dealing with. By that time it gets to that point, everybody in the company is usually aware that something's going on and how to handle it.
Just one other point as a lawyer. If you're big enough to have general counsel and you're bringing in new consultants, even if they're technology consultants, for example, try to bring them in through your counsel, because they are more likely to be covered by attorney-client privilege, so that you have a little breathing room on how to deal with this and how to communicate openly while you're dealing with the situation.
I would add, consider a cyber insurance policy. A lot of the companies actually carry cyber insurance policies, actually have a person on staff that is well aware of how to respond to an event, and also keep you in line with the requirements of that policy. And actually, as recent as April of this year, they actually adopted 12 principles on effective cyber insurance guidelines, because the insurance companies are getting better at providing this type of insurance for a lot of organizations, because they understand the impact to the organization's image, the impact to the constituents, and making sure that the organization maintains its face during an event.
The NIST model makes a distinction between response, which is your immediate actions to keep the doors open on the business and stop the bleeding, and recovery, which is what then you have to do to get from there to back to normal. In a small business, do you guys see that there's a distinction between that, or what's covered in a response plan versus a recovery plan?
It depends on the type of recovery we're doing. If we're doing a site recovery, if we're doing a data recovery, if we're doing a reputation recovery, they're all vastly different. Depending on your organization, do you have hot site, cold site? Do you have an operational site somewhere else in a different geographic area that you can get to in case something happens? If it's a data recovery model is one of the worst models that you're going to have to go through, because as a standard employee, you don't feel the loss. It was data. They actually didn't take the whole database and left you with an empty hole. You still have your stuff. They just have a copy of it too. So there's no feeling of it being lost. And I will call this one out by name. HB Geary Federal went out and decided he was going to list some members' names of Anonymous. Anonymous, a hackers group, we call them the Collective, didn't take too kindly to that and tore his network up while he was on stage. And then just to punch him in the eye one last time, they flattened his iPad as he was doing his presentation on it. Just to let him know they were there. They recovered. A lot of damage control with getting it out front. Hey, we've been breached. It was a phishing scam. It was whatever. RSA had their tokens compromised off a phishing scam. It wasn't hacked. Nobody decrypted the encryption scheme. They stole it. And when you steal it, you can reverse engineer it. But they still had copies of it. So you don't get that feeling of loss like you do if the building burns down or your car's missing or there's 6,000 missing laptops. So those things, you have to take those into consideration when you do that. For data, most of your employees are going to go back to business as usual, but there's going to be some tighter controls. Everybody's going to be hyper vigilant on everything. And it's going to cause work productivity to kind of fluctuate for a little while. I'm telling you, I've seen it. But you've got to get back on that horse as fast as possible.
At this point, I'd like to open it up. Are there any questions from the floor?
You mentioned before that even if you use third-party apps, like online, your executive people and your board is still responsible. Our company is completely online, so we don't have a server, we don't keep anything on our PCs. How do I protect my executive management and our board if those third parties get hacked in some way from any kind of legal repercussions?
I mean, you really just have to demonstrate that you really need to treat them as though they're employees of you, like that they are part of your company, right? So you need to, if you have a security policy, they need to follow that. If you don't have a security policy, I would recommend that you go to them and ask them for theirs, and so that you can at least demonstrate that you've gone out and done your due diligence over them, and they have a policy, and you know, if you want to take it further, you could always say, well, I'd like to have somebody come in and audit against your policy and see if you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. So, but you have to actively do something. You can't just say they've got it.
Yeah, I agree, and it also doesn't absolve you of trying to do good cyber hygiene for whatever you can control with your employees. So think both ways.
Hi, identifying cyber risk, we talk a little bit about financial transactions, for example, ACH versus electronic funds transfer, wires versus using checks, those types of things.
So the question is about different types of financial transactions and what the risks and liabilities are associated with them.
Or best practice, perhaps.
Or best practice, okay.
If you write a check and you put it in your mailbox to send to somebody, how many people touch that check before it gets where it's going?
3.
You, the postman, the mail carrier at the post office, unknown to numbers of people at another place, the person that delivers the mail on the other side, the person who receives the mail on the other side, it gets to the accounts receivable. How many people in accounts receivable touch it? She puts it in or he puts it in, got to be neutral. They send it back so the bank takes the funds out. How many people have now touched that? And checks in the mail that got lost. When I do an electronic transfer, it is guaranteed, it is insured by every transaction. The banks must, it is a law, they must comply with that law. One of the things that I do outside of this is I belong to an organization called I Hack Charities. And we really don't. We offer security services to 503Cs that cannot afford it. We pick the ones we do, they don't come to us. And one of the things that I do is I teach the elderly who don't have access or are just getting a smartphone or computers to understand online banking, to understand those transactions and what really happens. Because trying to pry a checkbook out of my grandmother's hands has been damn near impossible. But I don't have any repercussion if somebody makes a mistake with a check. It's on you. Somebody could come by and take the check. It could fall on the floor under a postal machine and it never get picked up. And now you're responsible. The banks not only have to follow the electronic commerce law, you're allowed to use all those documents in a court of law to protect yourself if you get audited. How many people actually knew that? Because if the IRS or another state tax agency is going to come after you for misappropriation of funds and they're going to use those documents against you, you're allowed to use those same documents to protect you. And we don't realize that. Why? Because we don't read the legalese, that little tiny that you got to get a microscope and read it at the bottom of a page. I'll give you another one. How many people in this room or online receive an actual paycheck? None of you do. It's direct deposited in your account. Do you know that the person who puts the money into your account when you sign that form also has the legal authorization to take that money out without telling you? Did you know that? They do, because you gave them the slip to do it with. And it happens. Oh, we made a mistake on your check. We gave you too much money. We're either going to take it out or not give it to you next check. In DOD, they take the money out of your account. So anything that's used in one side can be used on the other, and it has to follow that law. Does that help you at all?
That's another side of the coin.
Yes. But like with Wall Street and the FTC, they're governed by laws that are much stricter. In fact, for security reasons, they don't even use firewalls. They bypass, Wall Street does not have a firewall on it.
I don't understand the force security rules.
Because the transactions have to be so fast and there's an attack that can outrun a firewall TCP handshake. There is an attack out there that we've proven that we can outrun it, and we can actually take 3 cents off every single trade. And by the end of the year, whoever can do it is a millionaire. So they actually bypass the firewalls because of the delay in time.
You had mentioned some very simple measures, such as frequent changes of passwords and longer passwords. Would you mind highlighting any password management systems that make this a little bit more manageable, that are safe to
By
use?
name or just in general?
Better
I'll give you one by name
otherwise
that
in
IBM
general.
actually allows us to use, and it's called Keep Pass. KEEP PASS, Keep Pass. It's a password management tool.
We have an office of 10 people. In the summertime, we have 10 interns that come in. So because of the issues that I found with, even when I lock down the machine, sometimes viruses get in. I've decided to put Chrome boxes on those machines. what kinds of things should I still be looking out for with a device like a Chromebox?
Keep the interns out.
Patch management, right? That's the key, because I've actually seen vulnerabilities come in through Google Chrome, unpatched Google Chrome. So even if you have, Chromebox, which hardens your system, the vulnerability, the potential for vulnerability still exists. And the only way you can get away from that is to make sure that you keep updated on your patches. Are you going to be able to keep viruses from coming in? No, not a chance. You're not going to be able to keep malware out. There's several stages of malware that are out there that'll, find its way into your network if it wants to find its way in. The idea is to make sure that you have the right safeguards in place. And for your answer, I'd say start with patch management.
But you also want to manage those interns' access, right? They shouldn't be getting access to everything your other employees are getting to. You should be turning off their access and their identities as soon as they're no longer there, and maybe even managing how much access, how much time they have on your system while they're working for you.
Hi, could you talk a little more about cyber insurance, which is a question we got a lot in advance of this session? What kinds of things to look for in policies? Seems to be a changing field.
I could start that, I guess, speaking on cyber insurance next week. Cyber insurance is definitely with us, but it's still a very small market. It's about $1.5 billion or so at the end of this year, in a market of, just in the US, of almost $300 million. So it's still something that is up and coming, and there are lots of flavors of cyber insurance. It's difficult, in fact, to compare them because they offer so many different things. You want to make sure that you really read through the fine print of what is not included in a cyber insurance policy. Some things, some of the exceptions could be quite broad and can counteract exactly what you would want to insure. So, for example, you want to make sure that attribution is not an issue because in cyber breaches, attribution is the biggest problem. So you don't want to get stuck by that.
I can give you a resource to start, www.naic.org. There's a wealth of information there on cyber security policies. It's www.naic.org.
I don't know how many of the technical folks we have here or have online, but your cyber insurance is valid, but it's the third part of reducing your risk. It's the transfer of risk. If you can't mitigate it and you can't live with the residual risk, that's when you transfer the risk to somebody else. That somebody's gonna have to own it. You're gonna pay for that, somebody owning that. But before it ever gets to cyber insurance, you're still gonna have to do your due diligence and take your due care, because they're just not gonna insure you just to take your money, because then you become a liability to them and they wanna reduce their liability as well. Read. Every document that you're handed, do not sign until your attorney reads it and their attorney reads it. And you read it again, read it backwards, read it in the shower, read it. Because there's nothing like realizing that you don't have flood insurance and your house was flooded because you didn't read it.
Yeah, that's an extremely good point. Most of the insurance companies today, because there's really a limited amount of information around breaches and what they cost and all that, there's really very little underwriting that goes on around these policies. So they tend to, first of all, they limit what they'll pay out, but they will typically send you a questionnaire and ask you to fill it out and certify that you're doing certain things. If you're not doing them, they will not pay you. So you have to be real careful what you're saying you're doing and not doing. And
we probably got time for one more question.
So my question is, we have people doing work on their mobile phones, and I would like to know what is the least invasive way to secure mobile devices, especially because some people send emails through free Wi-Fi networks and things of that sort.
So securing mobile devices and particularly over free Wi-Fi services.
There are products and services out there that allow, there's two different types. One is just endpoint mobile device management. Most every major vendor has it. And there's also a way that you can control everything from a centralized server. The federal government, we use it a lot, and some of them are still on BlackBerry, and we call them Blueberries, because they only talk on a federal network, and you can have everything encrypted and it only talks to that, and all other services are turned off.
We have about 15 more minutes for questions. I want to go back and ask another question, if I may. Breach planning, I heard that this is very important. What are the key pieces that should go into a breach plan? Especially for a small nonprofit. What are the key elements that they should know and do, rehearse in a breach plan?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a whack at that, and others can add. You know, it doesn't have to be real complicated, especially in a small organization, right? But I think the key is making sure that people understand what their role is, right? So initially, when something occurs, who's going to get together and figure out, is this really something that's, you know, an issue, or can we just deal with it and move on? There needs to be a sort of a formal process around that. So that's sort of the first thing. The second would be then, okay, once we declare sort of a state of emergency, what are we actually going to do? Do we call law enforcement? Do we call our attorneys? That all needs to be documented fairly clearly and specifically so that you do the right things at the right time. From a technical standpoint, the technology folks need to know what to do, right? Do they lock down the environment? Do they start preserving information that's on the systems that could have been compromised? If you don't do some of those things, your legal recourse is very limited. So if you try to go and fix the problem yourself and you start mucking around with the data, you may not have any legal recourse.
In some states, you're not allowed to muck with the data. It is against the law. In fact, 24 states now says you have to have a PI license to do your own forensics. So if you start digging in your own system, you just contaminated the chain of custody and it's all thrown out in 24 states. My state is one of those states. I have to go get a PI license. And if the nightmare behind that is absolutely, I have to go to work for a PI firm for 6 years and be an apprentice. I don't have time for that. Sorry. But on the and we say technical, I say tactical. On the tactical front, when you say I'm going to lock the system down, that may be your first recourse. That may be your first knee-jerk reaction. How much does it impact? If I'm Dell Computer, I can't do that. All of my business is online. If I'm bodybuilding.com, all of my business is online. If I lock that down, how much more do I impact in loss? And in case you're curious, Dell is $33,000 a second is what they average. So you can't lock it down. So when we design networks, I personally go through and say, we're going to design them in enclaves, and we're going to put protection mechanisms from your users to your servers that actually can lock down traffic if I need to. My web server farm is somewhere else. I can limit the traffic to that farm if I need to. Most people do a router, firewall, switch, and let it go. Or a layers of switches. I do not, now I'm not cost effective, but it works. But when you write down your tactical plan or your technical plan, how is it going? Then you have to practice that breach at the front of your network, in the middle of a network, in the back of your network, because they all operate differently. Anybody can stop a denial of service attack with the right equipment. Snowden, Manning, how do we stop those when they look legit? How do you identify that baseline went way outside the normal? So when we talk about that breach and we talk about how to get that response plan, everybody's has their piece. You know, for me, it is a field audit. You start auditing every user. How many users do we have? How many are we supposed to have? Is there another machine that's been introduced to the network? You do a hardware audit. You look at software audit. You do it immediately. You don't have to have somebody professional come in and go, why are you using Google Docs when we only allow Office 365? That doesn't take a genius. That takes somebody being an ass to going through and doing it. Then you start looking at your logs. You start doing immediate triage on that network. Even if you are wrong in what you're looking at, you are at least reducing what it is you have to look at later. The average adversary sits in your network an average of 9 months before he's detected. It takes you another 45 days to figure out what to do about that adversary and 35 to 38 days to kick him out. That's a year. That is a full year you're looking at getting an adversary out of your network once you have it. And I can tell you 90% of the companies don't practice breach response. They don't practice data recovery. When I come in to assess your network, one of the first things I ask is run me a backup on a server, on an odd server, and let me see what happens. An entire backup. That's the first thing I look at. If you can't prove to me that you got valid backups, I'm out. You don't want to pay my hourly rate. To sit there and watch you rebuild backup devices. You just don't.
Thank you very much. To your point, what places are for third-party audits, certifications in your security plan, and how do you know you've had a thorough one?
Fortunately for us in this industry, and Andrew can attest, we cannot certify ourselves. So for IBM's pen test team, vulnerability assessment team, and our third-party managed services, we can't validate that we're good and we do what we say we do because we said we did it. We're IBM. We built Watson. That doesn't work. PwC's got to come in. Somebody else has got to come in. They can't do themselves. Somebody else has to do them as well. And it's not an honor among thieves because we're all vying for that business. And there are strict rules and guidelines we must follow. You can also talk to, if you are dealing with a vendor, and I don't care if it's managed services, if it's buying a third-party product, I don't care who it is or what it is, beat them up. If a sales guy and his engineer can't come in here and take the heat from you asking questions, you don't want their services. I promise you. If you go to a sales guy and you go, well, tell me about your data loss prevention, or tell me about this, and he goes, wrong answer, get him out of there. Your gut feeling will tell you more when you talk to somebody about what they can do than what they can't do over anybody else. You guys are in the similar industries. You are all a nonprofit. Talk amongst each other. Who have you used? Who have you used? Well, I didn't like that guy. That guy over here was pretty cool. There's a lot of small MSSPs that would love to have your business that do a very good job. That do a very good job at what they do. Then there are giants like we're sitting up on this board, giants in this industry. We all do a very good job of what we do.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is don't mistake compliance for actually good security, because you can get maybe some smaller firms that will come say you're PCI compliant, but make sure that they are doing a very thorough job. Because I've seen reports that are 2 pages long and I've seen reports that are 100 pages long, cost the same, but totally different results. So you got to be careful that you're using someone that's reputable and has done a good job, and when they say you're compliant, you actually do have good security in place.
In some cases, governments, like the New York City government, for example, will provide lists of approved vendors where they've done some, at least basic checking of the vendor. That's not necessarily, to Andrew's point, it's not full security necessarily, but at least they can tell you that these are compliant organizations, that they've been put on sort of a better business list.
Could I just offer a couple questions that came from advanced registrants? and also from the live stream. There were some questions about securing data when you're operating in a cloud-based environment. That was one. And we also had a question about tips on securing guest networks. That was another. And then you just touched on one point, how do we choose good vendors to help us build our systems, monitor our systems, deal with breaches when they occur. Those questions. Anyone on the panel?
You probably do not want my view on cloud technology, even though we have patents in it and we have a very large one. My primary customer base does not use it. They will not use it. Now, if you're going to use the cloud, if you have the funds and you have the budget and the resources, make it a hybrid cloud, own part of it. Now you have skin in the game. Make sure that when you're running your hybrid audits, because you still got to do your due diligence, make sure that that slice of what you're using, let's say it's Amazon's cloud, make sure it's your dedicated slice. Or if you're using a private cloud provider, what are you paying for? Do they allow you to come look at that equipment and prove to you that you're on your own piece and you're not sharing that rack space? Because we all hear cloud, we all hear it's a reduction of servers. No, it's not. It's just somebody else's. Nothing's been reduced. It's just been reduced for you. Somebody else had to put the machines up. So you don't have that overhead cost. But somebody's got a machine. It just does not sit out there. So you've got to verify who you're sharing it with.
Yeah, one of the other important measures to look at with cloud is also understand where your information is. A lot of the cloud providers will have data centers, not just in the contiguous United States, but across the border. And if that's important for you, then you need to know, is your information in a place that you can actually have some laws protect you in the event something happens.
I just add, because we've been going through some of this. In the cloud, one of the real advantages is that you've got a very mature organization. It's a large organization. Somebody's doing backups. Somebody's putting up firewalls. But you need to confirm that that in fact is in place. And to the what you were saying before earlier about read your documentation. If it doesn't say they're running backups, they're not. So you need to make sure that backups are being run, that you need to make sure that there are firewalls in place, that there's intrusion detection in place. So it is a way to get a lot of infrastructure that would be more you typically found in a larger organization, but you need to check and make sure it's in the contract.
We just have 2 minutes, Bill. Would you like to get the panel to sum up now?
So my personal mantra is identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Any closing comments on what we've heard from this audience and our consensus for today?
Sure. My three are CIA, and that's not the three-letter organization. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'm going to empower everyone in the room to be cybersecurity professionals with one phrase. If it's convenient for you, it's convenient for the attacker. So to think cybersecurity, if you see something and it seems easy, it's almost like see something, say something. If you see something and it seems like an easy benefit for you, you have to start thinking security and say, okay, where's the vulnerability here? And just last point about cloud security, just real quick, and it's a low-hanging fruit. The folks that secure your documents in the cloud, most of them aren't responsible for protecting it from malware. So if you don't have good security on your endpoints, your laptops, the people you're sharing the documents with, someone can easily upload something to the cloud to share with you. It can have a virus or some type of malware, and you'll download it to your system, and now you're infected.
I'm going to keep it very low tech because so many organizations are small. Figure out what you're really protecting because you can't protect it all. And really have good personnel policies. People are still the biggest risk.
I will leave you the same way I started. No.
and I'll just end with the same, sort of the same way I started, is just, I think this is a great group, and I think you need to take advantage of the information that you all have and share with each other where you can, because I think, you know, as each of you have issues or problems or, you know, questions, I think you'll be able to help each other if you're sharing kind of security information back and forth regularly.
So whether you're a large or small nonprofit, this is a must. It's no longer a maybe, it's a must. So thank you. Thanks to our panel for this incredible sharing of information. Thank you to our sponsor, American Express, for helping to make this possible. And thank you to all of you for being here today, and to all of those who have joined us via live stream. This will conclude our program for today. And again, thank you very much.